Saturday morning. I was going to make a joke, but I don't know what's worse on a Saturday morning, talking about taxes or running. But there's a lot of people in town who are either here to talk about taxes and school budgets and town spending, and there's a lot of people up front who are running for a good cause, so everyone's finding something fun to do on their Saturday morning. For those of you who don't know me, I'm town manager Tony Mizuko. I'm dressed a little casually today. I have a 1-year-old's birthday after this, followed by a 5-year-old's birthday. So we're going to start off with Alan Slater, Chairman of the Finance Commission, and this year's past Chairman of the Budget Balancing Commission. He's going to go through some information, some slides. He's then going to turn it over to Dr. Thompson, the school superintendent, who's going to go through some information on the school department. I'll then briefly close it out with a discussion of the MOU or pledge that the town is doing as part of the override process, and then we're going to open it up to questions and answers, which is really what we're here for. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Mr. Slater.
Thank you, Tony. I mean, personally, this time of the morning, I'd rather be in my jammies having my second cup of coffee, but here I am today. All right, so let me just start off, and thank you for everybody coming on a Saturday morning. Appreciate it. Let's just go through a couple of quick thoughts before we begin. I think these are sort of things that we should be cognizant of, given some of the issues and some of the emotions we have. But it's okay to be passionate, but we all must remain civil. There are no easy answers and no easy decisions, but again, no one has done anything wrong, and no one is trying to do anything wrong. There are different people who have different visions of how Norwood should go. It doesn't mean that anyone is a bad person. I think that's something I really want to emphasize. We're one community and will remain so no matter what happens. And your neighbors today will still be your neighbors tomorrow. Again, very important to remember. We have challenges facing us, but our decisions will impact tomorrow. We really have to think about where our community is going to go, where it is now, where it's going to go, and where we'd like it to be in the future. So let me talk a little bit about our budget strategy. Budget Balancing Committee began meeting in June of last year. We generally don't begin meeting until the end of the calendar year, but we realized that last year, FY19 was a very difficult budget year. We just scraped by, and we wanted to begin the process a lot earlier. So as people are aware, Budget Balancing Committee consists of representatives of the Finance Commission, the Selectmen, as well as the School Committee, and we get together to discuss the budget, what our revenues are, and then divide them amongst the three main portions of the budget, which are general government, the school department, and shared costs. And shared costs, as you know, represents things like health insurance, retirement, debt service, etc. Did things a little differently this year, because usually we just look at the next year when we look to project revenues. We decided we wanted to do a 5-year plan, do a 5-year projection, because we didn't want to come up with a 1-year fix. We wanted to come up with what we consider to be a long-term solution, and in municipal government, 5 years is really as long as you can reasonably project out with reasonable numbers and assumptions. So we made assumptions, on budgets based on historical averages, whether it's increases in retirement costs or increases in salary, increases in debt service. Assume some reasonable growth in the budget. And as I said, we developed a long-term strategy. A minimum of 5 years. Whatever solution we want has to be long-term. Again, for the minimum of 5 years. We don't want to come back to people. And the next slide sort of shows you part of the reason we're in the situation we are. It shows beginning in FY 2002 what the state aid was at the beginning of that year and what it would be if it rose at 2.5% a year, which is what Proposition 2.5 is. But the red line below shows what state aid actually was. So as of FY19, there was a delta of $4.5 million over what it should have been as opposed to what it was, and that represents a major part of the deficit that we had. A little bit of an uptick in 2020, but we're still well below where we should be. Part of the problem we have as a community is we're not the federal government. We simply can't deficit spend and print money. So we're limited by how much we can raise in property taxes by Proposition 2.5, which was enacted, I think, around 81, and that's a main revenue source. You can't tax more than what you allow in Proposition 2.5 unless you go to what's referred to as an operational override. So bottom line is, no matter what your needs are, you can only raise your total town tax levy by no more than 2.5% a year. Those numbers were set, in the early 80s. As a community, we also can't develop additional revenue sources other than those that are approved by the legislature. You can't simply add fees, charges, or other taxes unless you have legislative approval. As people recall, a few years ago, the legislature allowed us to have additional hotel and meal taxes. We took advantage of those, but you can't simply say, well, the state allowed us to increase the meals tax, let's say I think it was 0.75%. Let's increase it to 1.5%. Can't do that. You can only do as much as what the state allowed. And you also can't raise fees a greater amount than the actual cost of the service. The example I always use is you can't have your dog license fees is $1,000 a year for your dog. This isn't going to work. Because I have a cat, so I really don't care anyway. All right. So what got us here? I've already mentioned the limitations we've had on our ability to generate revenue, which was established by the legislature. The mandates of education from the state, or maybe I should say unfunded mandates. That's probably a more apt term. We've always used one-time revenues in the past to try to balance the budget. That's a term you've heard people use, the so-called rabbits out of the hat. Didn't have any this year. Deferred maintenance of town buildings, and I think you saw that in the last few years. People, long-time town meeting members, by the cost of having to repair the town hall as well as St. Gabriel's Chapel. If we were able to maintain them, as we should have over the years, those costs either would have been lower or we could have even deferred the renovation for some time in the future. And then, the issue we have with Proposition 2.5 that was set in the early 80s, we have to live with that. So what's an override? Override's a tax increase. It's an increase greater than what we're allowable under Proposition 2.5. And this is a permanent increase. It's a permanent increase to our taxes. It's different from the debt exclusion that we had several years ago for the high school, which goes away, after you've paid the bonds back for the high school, which is, 20 some odd years after high school initially opened. So that ultimately will go away. This is a permanent increase to your taxes, and that's what it is. Looking at the numbers, we calculated that out to be $390 a year based on average residential value, which is $452,000. And of course, it's a little less, a little greater, depending on the value of your home. Three things have to happen for this to pass. One is for the Board of Selectmen placed on the town warrant. That's already occurred. Town meeting has to appropriate money. Town meeting doesn't necessarily vote on an override, they just vote on a budget. And then the public, by a vote, which is scheduled for June 3rd, will make a decision whether the override will go forward or not. That's done by a simple majority. All of those have to happen. So when we started talking about an override, we looked at different numbers. The first number we looked at was $11 million. It was like, no, not going to work. So we went through a number of iterations, and we came up with a number significantly less than that. It's still a significant number, but certainly less than what the original estimate was, $5,950,000. That involves several items. The first item is $3.2 million to fix the deficit in the school budget. An additional $300,000 for the general government and the airport for snow and ice. $250,000 for more road funds to supplement what we get from the state. Additional school programming of $1.5 million, which is to bring back several programs, personnel that were lost in the past, as well as some new items, and an override stabilization fund, which we'll get into a little bit more detail on. That's really intended to provide funds so that the process lasts a minimum, and I repeat, a minimum of 5 years, hopefully much longer than that. And I think, you know, if we show some discipline as a community, we can make it last an awful lot longer than that. So, you know, again, here are the averages to a typical home in Norwood, $390 a month. You know, again, the cost, if you want to look at it on a monthly basis or a daily basis, but the bottom line is it's, on average, it's $390 a month. Oh, yeah, excuse me. Thank you. All right. A lot of people have asked, what does this really mean? I mean, what is $389? I mean, how often do we see that? And some people have sort of drawn the conclusion that if the first year it's $389, and the second year it's $389 plus another $389, and the third year it's $389 and $389 plus another $389, and that really isn't the case. Using the example of if your bill is $4,900 a year without an override, then with an override it'll be $5,289. So based on, you know, the override, how much is your tax bill going to go up the next year? Simply based on the override itself, it's only going to go up another $9, which is 2.5% of $389. And, you know, after that, it's just your regular 2.5% override, 2.5%, typical 2.5% increase. It's really nothing more than that. This is a table that simply shows, depending on the value of your home, what the average tax increase will be. And I think it should be noted that if you look at the column on the right, that's the increase to commercial, industrial, facilities, and they're going to pay a great part of this override. And the cost of them is actually, on an equivalent basis, almost double to what it would be for a residential homeowner. So they'll be paying probably about maybe 42–43% of the overall override. I know people look at this slide and say, oh, that's certainly my street. Well, this is the problem we have. You know, roads have to be maintained. We do get money from the Commonwealth. We don't get enough. We could use twice as much as we get. So one of the intents of this override is to put some additional money into the road budget so that we can do a better job of maintaining our roads. And not only do we want to put this money in, but on a yearly basis, on the general budget, we'd like to add a little bit more every year so we could do more roads and keep them up rather than try to having to do things simply because of problems like this. People have heard about the snow and ice budget. These are the numbers for the last few years. If you eliminate fiscal 15, which is the year where we had the 8-foot snow drifts, the average snow and ice budget for the general government side has been a little more than $800,000. Certainly we put less into that, but if you look at the $300,000 that we propose to put in, as well as this year's general budget for that of $675,000, we should easily be able, on the general government side, to be able to handle the snow and ice, as we hope we can, unless it's an unusual year. But that's why we have the ability to deficit spend in that. On the school side, if the override does pass, then the school budget will be close to $240,000 for snow and ice. And that, on a general, typical year, should be able to cover their deficit and their issues. Override Stabilization Fund. This is a concept that's been developed. We used examples from the town of Arlington, which has had a very successful override. When they looked at their override originally, they thought it was going to last only 3 years. We're into year 7, it's still going strong. They may be going for one in the next couple of years, but the bottom line is it's lasted longer than it was originally intended to do. And over the first few years, it's a fund, you put money into it, and then over the latter years of the override, you're probably going to have to take some of that money out to be able to make up any shortfalls you have in your budget. So the intent is, at a minimum, you know, the override is going to last for 5 years. Again, I'm pretty confident that, you know, we show discipline and frugality at town meeting and amongst the general departments, both general government and school department. That should last greater than 5 years, and that's certainly what the goal is. So with that, I'd like to turn the mic over to Superintendent Dave Thompson.
Good morning. Oh, here we go, that's better. Those who know me well know I'm not a morning person, so I just wanted to show you that. Okay, so looking at the school department, if the cuts, if the override does not pass, there's basically cuts that we've been talking about, people are aware of. The big ones are closing the Bullitt School, reducing the number of teachers, eliminating funds for extracurriculars, and reducing funding for programs. So closing the Bullitt School, that's going to net us about $290,000. We still would offer full-day kindergarten, but it would be moved back to the elementary schools, and those that have been at the elementary schools will remember that we have classes going on in the hallways because they're overcrowded. So there's not really room to put the kindergarten there. In order to make room, we're going to have to lay off classroom teachers in other grades, which will increase the class size in order to fit the kindergarten in. We need to move a portable classroom that's at the Willett to the Prescott to address some size and space issues. And at the Willett, we will be laying off a nurse, a secretary, and reducing 2 custodians because that building will be closed. By closing it, we're able to turn off the utilities and save money there. But we're going to have to add in moving costs in order to move people, not only from the Willett, but also people around in buildings as we consolidate. Reducing teachers, that's going to net us about $600,000 of savings. At the elementary level, we're going to eliminate 4 elementary classroom positions. This is going to result, as I said before, in more students in our classes, higher than we would like. Middle school, a net of 3 middle school teachers. It would be a team in the 8th grade. We would have to add back in Spanish. The problem here is that that's actually going to raise the per teacher number of students they have up to 120. The recommended number is 100, and with the amount of feedback we need to give kids, you know, handing papers back, detailed feedback, individualizing instruction, the more kids you have, the harder it is to do that well. And the recommendation is 100, no more than 100 students. So we'll be adding 20 teachers to each, 20 students to each teacher's load in the 8th grade. High school 2.2, high school teachers, limited class offerings and reducing flexibility. This means that high school students are not going to be able to get the classes that they've asked to get. We actually would have to reschedule the high school in June. Normally high school schedules are done by the beginning of June, and you're just polishing them in July. Athletics, this is a $630,000 decrease. That means we would not be funding, not necessarily not having, but not funding varsity, JV, or freshman sports in the high school. We reduce the athletic director to part-time. We are looking at a pay-to-play, but if anyone watched the last school committee meeting, although that was a little bit late, there is Title IX considerations there and a whole bunch of pieces to that. The pay-to-play numbers are actually up on the website. Football will be upwards of $1,100 for students to play. Marching band would be over $1,000. Hockey would be way up there. I think it's about $2,400 for a kid to play. We're only looking at possibly running varsity sports, not JV or freshman, simply because we're not sure we're going to have the numbers, and obviously that's not sustainable, and enable kids to build a program and be competitive. Fine arts, reducing that. The in-school arts programs would happen, so if they're taking a class at the high school in a certain type of arts, those still happen, but it's the out-of-school arts classes. All the way down to the elementary school, your honor band, honor chorus, middle school as well. The state championship marching band would have to be self-funding. That's about $1,000 per student in order to run that on a pay-to-play scenario. And we have a fine, incredible arts program. It would be very difficult to put this Activities, these are your clubs, everything from student council, National Honor Society to the chess club. Those that watched the school committee last week noticed that we have sent the largest contingent ever to the national competition for National History Day. That would not be funded, they would have to be self-funded. The other thing we would reduce under this category is the late bus to the middle school. Middle school students can't drive themselves. Most of you are saying thank God, but they cannot drive themselves. But that isn't just because of activities, it's also going to impact kids needing to be able to stay after school for extra help as well. Okay, so the preferred budget is this override budget or contingent budget, supplemental budget, all meaning the same thing. We're looking to invest in our classrooms. This is not something that's happened in Norwood in the near future, the near past rather. We want to repair the structural deficit, so we're not trying to close deficits every year. It's very hard to plan and move forward if you're constantly in a financial crisis. We want to realize our 5-year strategic plan. The action plan was presented. It was a very busy school committee meeting last Wednesday night. It's a very ambitious plan. The first year, we're basically trying to get ready and build foundations and collect data, but year 2, 3, and 4, 5 will be very difficult to implement without proper funding. And we need to get in a position where we're proactive and forward planning so that we're going to become more efficient and better serve our students. So again, the goals, see if there's any there I haven't already spoken to. Don't think so. I don't know. Yeah, changing demographics. We're at 44% high needs right now. And to make sure those kids are making effective progress, you need to invest in what we're doing in the classroom. The last time this district bought a program, a curriculum, was 5 years ago. It should be in the operating budget. It was a capital expense. We should be looking at our curriculum yearly and replacing and supplementing it yearly. Okay, so we want to remain competitive with our neighboring districts. These students are not only competing to get into colleges and careers out of high school, but eventually they're going to need to have the background to do well to support themselves and to support the community they live in. We want to advance our, expand our AP offerings. We actually offer less than surrounding communities. The last 2 summers, I've had very difficult conversations with parents who were not able to have their children take AP. People will argue that AP is not the end-all and be-all, and it has changed how colleges accept that. But what it does do for students is it shows colleges that they're able to do college-level curriculum. It's a standard curriculum taught in a standard way, okay, and it prepares students for that higher-level academics. We want to meet Mass Core. Mass Core is what the state is calling college, career, or future-ready. 92% of our students do a Mass Core curriculum. We want it to be 100%. The reason why it's not is we are not able to guarantee 2 years of a foreign language, which is a state, I don't want to say requirement, but advisory that every student in high school have at least 2 years of foreign language. We do not have enough foreign language teachers to guarantee that. So about 8% of our students do not need Mass Core, and it should be 100%. Okay, so the non-override cuts would be restored if the override passed. That's keeping the Willet open, not overcrowding our elementary schools, restoring or not cutting athletics, fine arts, clubs, and activities. We would not be increasing class size, bringing back all those cuts. Okay, so there are areas for improvement. We want to be able to address those. Okay. Modernize the curriculum instruction for the 21st century. The MCAT standards have changed. They're going to be increasing. The test is going to get more difficult. The other piece that is important is that we are now working under a new accountability system that counts our lowest performing subgroup, our lowest performing 25%, multiple times in multiple ways. So it's important that we're making sure every student is making progress and improving. Special education, we have a very robust, substantially separate program. So instead of sending students out to other schools, which is cost effective and keeps them in the community, having peers in the community and friends in their town, It also saves us money, but we also need to look at our core class special education and improving how that is delivered, and that is going to be a focus going forward. Okay, our MCAS scores have stagnated, especially in English across the board. That is a direct result of we have not changed or improved our elementary ELA curriculum for 14 years. It should be every 6 or 7 that it's improved. Accountability measures, I mentioned those. And the other thing that's concerning is the students at the high school who have passed the MCAS their first try. That number has remained constant. It has not dropped. And if you're constantly going back and studying and retaking the MCAS, you're not doing higher level academics, which is what we need our students to be doing. Okay, so we want to make sure we're having more students in the intervention ahead of that sophomore test. Massachusetts is one of the few states in the country that requires students to pass an MCAS test in order to get a high school diploma. So we want that done in the sophomore year, so they're doing coursework that's going to prepare them for college or career or technical school or something moving on. If they're constantly going back over to get the minimum competency requirement in high school, they're not doing higher academics. Okay, so at the high school we would add, and I use add in loose terms because we've lost 5 high school core teachers over the last 10 years. We'd like to add 3 back. And they would offer flexibility in the schedule to expand our AP offerings, do what is called career pathways or innovation pathways. Again, last Wednesday, very busy meeting. There was a presentation by Dr. Gallagher on that. And that is basically linking career opportunities to coursework and college preparatory and certifications in the high school. So students are exploring careers, getting some basic understanding and some certifications. Micro-credentials is a new term we're going to hear in the next few years, out of high school, so that they either have a career path or at least they have some skills so they can move into a job that would pay beyond the minimum wage out of high school. One foreign language teacher, that would probably be Spanish, and that would address the math score and get us up a lot closer to 100% of our students doing that kind of graduation requirement. Middle school, last year we cut the librarian to halftime. Nothing sadder than walking into an empty library, which is supposed to be an epicenter and vibrant part of our school community. But a few years ago, we also cut back health and PE. If you talk to a middle school parent, they'll tell you that they do not get enough health and PE at the middle school. We'd like to bring that back up to the level it should be. One adjustment counselor. We need to be proactive with social and emotional issues. Right now, we're not. And what happens is kids sometimes get worse, and then they end up on special education plans because we're not solving the problems that are arising or helping kids work through mental health issues. When they're little and small, only when they're big. Most of our adjustment counselors' caseload is special education, so when a kid is having difficulty, there's very few people, or not the right number of people, to address that. So at the middle school, you'll see it again at the elementary school. We should have one adjustment counselor for every 200 students, which is basically 1 per school at the elementary level. We do not. They're 60%, 50% in some cases. So, I jokingly say, if you're having a bad day, you need to wait till tomorrow and have the bad day. You can't have it today because there's no one here to see. One more thing, a special education teacher at the middle school. We have a substantially separate program that really needs to be split around social and emotional to better serve students. And again, that is about investing and making sure that our students are getting the help they need. Moving them out of those programs is ultimately the goal, but also making sure that they're not elevating in need so they're going out of district, which can cost 4 or 5 times more than what we would be paying in district. Elementary, matching the math model, where we put in a new math program and brought in an incredible math coach, Jill Milton. We would like to do that with ELA to address the stagnating English language arts scores at the elementary level. 2 adjustment counselors, this would bring us up to that 1 per school level, or almost to that one per school level, get a little less at the Willett. And 1 elementary teacher district-wide to address class size. We actually, in order to keep our class size, need to add at least 1 elementary school teacher. If it does not pass, we'll be cutting them. Okay, for the entire district, English language learners, we're up to 383 English language learners in the in the district. We've added 83 since the middle of July. That number is increasing. I expect it will be upwards to 90 new EL, English Language Learner students coming into the district. That is a mandate. We have to provide a certain level of service. We are maxed out. Okay, we are just barely meeting the mandate. And if we're just barely meeting the mandate, yeah, it's compliance, but it's not necessarily investing. If we invest early and give the kids the curriculum and the things that they need early on, we'll move them out, and it'll actually cost us less money over the long run. But we need at least 1.5. Technology assistant, you remember last year we cut a person out of the technology department. Meanwhile, we added 1,750 Chromebooks, devices to the mix. You can see how that doesn't quite work out very well and is not sustainable. So we like to add a technology person back in. So curriculum, I affectionately call it curriculum refresh, but it is a cycle. We would start off with $300,000. We're in the process of looking at our ELA curriculum, looking to purchase one next year, but that's contingent on the override. So we could go to 15 years without addressing an English language learner, English language arts curriculum that the standards have changed at least 2 times. Since then, and English is not the same as it was 20 years ago, the requirements around that. So the next year we would look at a different curriculum. This is the plan right now. That would be social studies. There is a civics curriculum that just came out and a requirement for civics instruction. That would be part of the social studies review next year for the purchase of next year. So you get into a cycle, and this should be part of the operating budget. This should not be a capital expense or a special expense, because every year we should be looking at our curriculum, making sure it's being effective, making sure it's giving teachers the best tools they can have in the classroom. And if you do a little bit year in, year out, it's not a massive purchase. Okay? Other programs, we need curriculum materials for English language learners. Right now, the teachers are creating those, but it doesn't have the full scope and sequence it should have. Intervention materials, Project Lead the Way, these are about investing in the classroom. The intervention is where you're finding kids where they're falling behind, and you have materials and methods, and there's other pieces that fall into this as well, where we're actually making sure they're on track and moving forward, not only so that they're achieving the standards and on their way to graduate and pass the MCAS that first time, all right, and have more opportunities, but if you don't do that, if you don't have those tools in the classroom, there's a bigger gap from where they should be and where they are, and sometimes they qualify for special ed, which is part of why our numbers are so high, 21, 22%. Okay. Project Lead the Way is a curriculum that is based on hands-on learning and essential skills that job markets are looking for, and it also is a career awareness program looking at STEM, math, and other engineering. All right, and creating that interest at the middle school is part of a career exploration part. Oftentimes we have kids leaving the high school not really knowing what they want to do, going off to college not really knowing what they want to do, spending a lot of time searching in college, which is expensive, long term, not graduating in 4 years, more debt. Okay. Curricular programs, and I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but these are all about investing in the classroom, giving our teachers in Norwood the tools they need to make sure the kids are making progress. The budget hearing, that was the 24th of April, that presentation, which is online on the school website, and the school committee budget is also on the main page, gives a lot more detail as to what those programs are. I can answer questions for them, but if you want to go back to that, there's a lot more detail there to see here. Okay, so the 5-year projections for the school department shows a structural deficit. These cuts we're talking about are not the end. If our current budget situation stays the way it is, next year we're looking at a minimum of $650,000, probably more than that, because what the school committee has done is they have pushed our reimbursement for out-of-district special ed, known as circuit breaker, pushed as much as we could put in there, which means we would not have as much of an offset in years 2, 3, and 4. So that $650,000 could easily be $750,000 to $1 million short. Okay, so on top of these cuts, next year we'd have to find $650,000 to $1 million more to cut. There is a structural deficit. The gap is not closing between what we need, a lot of it is mandated, okay, and what the revenue is providing. Okay, and just as a reminder, $1 million is about 16 teachers. Obviously, we'll try to get creative and find other things besides just teachers, but you can kind of get an idea. We already have, would have large class sizes. We already have less curriculum and courses going on, and now we're looking at another, possibly another $1 million in 21. Ms. Mizuka.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. So just to summarize, these are the dollar amounts for the override. This is what totals up to $5,950,000. The restoration and enhancement of programs at the school department, restoring some of the cuts and some of the budget offsets, totaling $4.7 million, $250,000 for road repair, $300,000 for the snow and ice, to sort of fix our snow and ice budget, if you will. And just to point out, Alan Slater mentioned that earlier, we deficit spend every year on our snow and ice, which means we are going into a budget year knowing that it will cost us several $100,000 more than we actually have budgeted, and that money just comes out of reserves. So it's sort of like at the end of the month, you know your mortgage is $1,000 and you only have $700, you know you don't have enough money, we're pulling that money right out of the bank somewhere else. And then $700,000 is the override stabilization account. That number will change annually as the rest of the budget absorbs that cost, but that's to balance us over at least the 5-year period. We didn't want to just look at a 1-year solution and then possibly have challenges in year 2 or year 3. We didn't go beyond year 5 because your projections beyond year 5 ended up becoming a little bit more difficult to make. This sheet is available on both the school's website and the town's website. This just lists the specific lines that funding is going to in the school budget, both with what their request is that we have to pass and then what the override would adjust those numbers to. So the override pledge is a document that was signed off on by the school committee, the finance commission, and the board of selectmen. And this is following a model that the town of Arlington built where they went to their community and they went to the taxpayers and said, if we're going to pass an override to fix some problems, we're going to agree to A, B, and C in terms of how we're going to manage that money and manage the town's budget going forward. So this, of course, is available on the website as well, but I'm going to go through it briefly with folks. The goals to obviously have the override funds last 5 years. It includes, as we've said, an override stabilization account to achieve that. There will be a cap on both the town, the general government budgets and the school budgets of 3.5% a year. And interesting, just make sure we're clear on that, that's an upper cap. That doesn't mean that that amount of spending is available every year. That's just saying that if that amount of spending is available, neither the school budget nor the town, the general government budget will increase by more than 3.5% a year. There's going to be a limit on the number of full-time positions that can be added throughout the override period. And again, there's no guarantee there's dollar amounts after the first year to add any positions, but we're going to cap that. And the reason being, for us to control our costs and our expenditures, we are a service organization. The service that we provide as a town is a labor service. It's a person 9 times out of 10. And that's where between 70 and 80% of our costs are. So if you think of teacher in the classroom, the cost is that teacher providing the service. If you think about a police officer responding to a call or a firefighter responding to a call, our cost isn't in the cruiser, it isn't in the uniform, it's in the salary, the benefits of the person providing the service. We're different from a manufacturing operation or from some other type of, let's say, a food service operation where your cost of goods sold is a major part of your budget. For us, it's the person that provides the service. So there's a limit on both the school department and the general government, which is your town departments, on how many positions could be added, even if the funds are available. There's no guarantee that they will be available. And that's not a target. The goal is not to say, well, let's add 4 positions per year. It's just saying that even if funding is available, that's an absolute upper limit. We're going to program health insurance costs at 5%. Historically, we've been averaging about 4.7 to 4.8%. It's a large budget item for us. It's about $14 million of the budget. If health insurance costs exceed that 5%, both the general government and the school budget will have to reduce their budget appropriation by the corresponding amount. If it ends up coming in less than that, and we sometimes don't know until the end of the year exactly what it's going to come in at, that money will be placed in the override stabilization account to extend the time frame of the override. Beginning in FY21, the allocation to road paving will not be decreased or transferred to another line. So this is to prevent any concerns over sort of a bait and switch where the community goes to the taxpayers and says, we need to raise money, we're trying to solve problems, and road infrastructure is one of those problems we're trying to solve, and then in a future year, we really want to do this over here, or we think we have a problem over here, we're not going to reduce the amounts we're programming into these items. It's an honest request to the taxpayers to say, please help us solve these community issues. We're going to keep those monies going towards those items we're attempting to solve. Snow and ice is the same. We're actually limited by state statute in reducing the amount of money we spend on snow and ice. If we were to reduce the amount of money we spend on snow and ice, we actually wouldn't be allowed to deficit spend on it. You can't deficit spend anywhere else in the budget. You can only do it on snow and ice. The state allows you to do it because, as you know, the winter can be unpredictable. We're consciously deficit spending every single year. So let's say we hit a period of a couple of mild winters, or we finally get to an average where we don't necessarily need to deficit spend every year. We're not going to then go and reduce that number and say, well, we asked for money to fix a problem, but let's go throw that money towards something else. It's an honest request to say these are problems we're trying to fix, because it's not just about the level of service, it's about trying to put us in a better financial position for the future. Obviously, the agreement will be reviewed if there are any substantial changes. We don't know, we never realistically know what the state's going to do. We also don't know what the economy is going to do. This is all predicated on the economy continuing to sort of chum along. That being said, if the economy ends up taking a turn, and for the worse, there's not going to be more money available for the town or the school budget. The document's going to guide the budget preparation, so the staff have signed on to this, and this is what the school committee, the Board of Selectmen, and the Finance Commission are dictating is going to be how we present and prepare our budgets. So you won't have a year where somebody says, well, I really need 9% this year, and we know the override says this. The staff have been directed to present it in a certain manner, and the boards, the Finance Commission, the Selectmen, and the school committee are going to prepare, promote, and present their budgets in accordance with this document. OPEB is our retiree healthcare liability, so it's a liability that every town in Massachusetts has to carry on its books. We're currently not necessarily putting as much money into it as we should be. There's really only maybe a handful of towns that are, but there's also a commitment that we're not going to decrease that, and we're going to continue to work on it. There again, we're not going to ask the taxpayers for additional funds to solve problems and then simply create problems somewhere else. And this last line here is that the town will utilize other available resources before going to the tax levy. So if we do have positive state aid in future years, if the state gives us another local option, or if we see enough new growth, we're going to focus on using those revenue streams first and using the property tax levy last as a revenue stream. That's very difficult for most communities to do, but I can tell you this is something unique in Norwood where we're saying let's consider everything else and then the tax levy first, whereas in most communities it's tax levy first and then everything else is sort of the gravy on top. So, just a couple of statements before we turn it over to Mr. Maloney to moderate. This is a great community. We have a lot of things that we should be proud of in Norwood, and we provide our citizens a great level of service, and our tax rate compared to other communities is actually very low. I told the story that people got a chuckle out of Thursday night. I was running some numbers with the override, and I accidentally typed in $59 million instead of $5.9 million. And the funny thing is, our average single-family tax bill in Norwood at a $59 million override would still be less than what Sharon and Westwood pay for their average home. So I was kind of surprised by that. We are at a crossroads. We have to discuss how we maintain and improve what we have. And the discussion really is where do we want our community to go? What do we want our community to look like? That's of course balanced by what can we afford, but it's really in the hands of the voters to decide where the community should be and what it should look like. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Maloney, last year's chairman of the Norwood Board of Selectmen. He's on the Budget Balancing Committee and still on the Board of Selectmen, and he's just going to sort of moderate and take questions and call on whoever he thinks is best to answer the question. We do have folks who are running mics to you, so if you just raise your hand, Mr. Maloney will call on you. We'll bring you a microphone just so NCM can pick it up and just so everyone can hear the question. Mr. Maloney.
Thank you, Mr. Mizuko. Just the first thing I know on behalf of all the members of the major boards, Mr. Mizuko and Dr. Thompson, we thank all of you for coming out on a Saturday morning to listen to this presentation. And we look forward to answering your questions. Normally at town meeting, what we do is we ask you to identify yourself and tell us what district you're from. You don't have to do that here unless you want to, but you are on television, don't forget. All right, so does anybody have a question? Yes, is that you, Courtney?
It is me.
How are you? Nice to see you.
Good morning, everyone.
You too.
There we go. Good morning, everyone. Courtney Rao Rogers, president of the League of Women Voters, former school committee person, chair for 2 years. I have a question for Dr. Thompson, actually, through you, Mr. Moderator. I'm in the industry. I know what the state defines high needs as, and with Norwood as a 44% high need district, I think it might behoove a definition from the school department as to what exactly is contained in that high need definition. Because 44% high needs in a single town is
Yeah.
a lot.
Yes, it is a lot. One thing clear, people who fall, students who fall into these categories are only counted once, but it is economically disadvantaged. English language learners, special education. So if you are a student in one or multiple, you are counted as what is considered high needs. Part of this year's budget, the governor and the legislature have noticed and are making Chapter 70 reimbursement based on that number, because those students tend to be, not always, tend to be more difficult to educate. Not difficult in that way, but more difficult to educate, and often costs more money to educate, so that is part of that.
Gentleman in the middle up there, but before we give him the microphone, just, I also want to point out that down at the front is the current chair of the Norwood School Committee, Maya Bodenhoff, who's here to support Dr. Thompson, and we also have in the audience Bob Donald from the Norwood Finance Commission as well. So, sir.
My name is Paul Ward, District 3, and Mr. Slater had identified one of the contributory problems to this deficit as being the state reimbursement, which is much further below the 2.5% allowable. My question is, what has the 2.5% rate of inflation, which is allowable? My question is, what has the actual rate of inflation been? And secondly, how does the town's spending compare to the actual rate of inflation percentage-wise? Is it much higher than the actual rate of inflation, or is it somewhere below that?
I can't tell you what the actual rate of inflation is. Something I can easily find out. Excuse me? Yeah. Again, I think it's different, whether you're looking at, the nation as a whole, or whether you're looking at this area. If you look at our spending as a community, it's probably been over 2.5%, I think, for a couple of reasons. One reason is that the amount of money we get from taxes and the 2.5 is not the only revenue source that we do get. It's the only revenue source on a yearly basis that we know we're going to get more money from. You don't know whether you're going to get more money from state aid on a regular basis, or what our department receipts will be on a regular basis. We know, in addition to the normal 2.5% increase, we do get additional tax revenue for what's referred to as new growth. Those things like additional homes or additional commercial and industrial properties that come into Norwood or expand. So the actual amount of tax revenue that we do get is somewhat greater than 2.5%. Having said that, the growth in the budget, has been slightly greater than 2.5%. It's expected, even with an override, that it will be somewhat greater than that. But given the safeguards that we have, particularly the override pledge, we are all very confident, and you can be assured that the Finance Commission will guarantee that people live within that budget, live within that amount, and do not come back to the town during that 5-year period, hopefully well past that, for additional money in the form of another override.
Do you want to add something?
So one of the challenges with looking at inflation as a number and saying, well, inflation grows at about 1.7%, why isn't the town's budget only growing at 1.7%? We really are a fixed industry similar to other industries. There's 350 other towns in Massachusetts, so you really got to compare our costs to how they're growing. Because the number for your national inflation number includes the price of food, which we're not subject to for the most part. Food could go up 30% it's really not going to impact the town's budget. Fuel's a big concern for us, but even then, it's actually relatively small. We're about 70 to 80% labor and benefit costs. So health insurance has been growing, for instance, as a subset, which for us is a major part of our budget at $14 million. We've been averaging about 4.5%, 4.7%. Nationally, that number has been much, much higher. When you look at our wage comparisons, which is really what you're going to look at for compared to other cities and towns in Massachusetts, we're more or less in the middle. We're high in some areas, we're low in a couple areas. I know our teacher salaries tend to trend more or less in the middle, maybe slightly below comparative communities. Our management wages tend to be up in some areas, low in some areas, not dramatically up or above in one area or another. So our costs are sort of trending where everyone else in our industry is trending. And for us to buck that trend is challenging. So our health insurance is heavily regulated by the state. There's a series of state laws that for many, many years, going back decades, actually the 1950s, that require us to offer health insurance to all employees who work 20 hours or more. We have to offer it at the same rate to all employees. We can't go below a certain percentage. We can't actually offer individual products. We have to offer group insurance, that's in state law. Our pension system, which is well funded in Norwood, we do better than average on our pension funding, but the whole system is actually governed by state law. So we have these challenges where we're pretty much industry comparable, but we are stuck with a lot of things that we just can't change because the state doesn't allow us to change them. But the main point is looking at our salaries. Our bulk of our, I don't say the bulk of our salaries are teacher salaries, but our largest single department is the school department. Our largest single workforce is teachers, so that is our biggest single salary cost, and they trend average or below average with the rest of the state.
Mr. Bergeron.
Michael Bergeron. I've always had trouble with technology.
Just shout it out, Mike.
I have two follow-up questions. One of them is the very first chapter was shown. It showed the inflation at 16.1%, and that was in the state. And then the reimbursement was somewhat below that. I think it was 11 and something.
State aid, right? It was the
State aid, yes.
chart, yep.
The very first chart, it was 11 and something, right?
Yep.
So that's the first question. Second question that I have, 11.5, okay, thank you. Second question is in follow-up to the question that was asked. With regard to high needs, there's a income component and low income component, I believe, that goes into that calculation. What is that defined as those from families living below the poverty line, or what defines low income in that calculation?
Yeah.
Dr. Thompson.
Economically, I'm kind of reaching here. I have to go back and look. But basically, if you qualify for free reduced lunch, you would be economically disadvantaged. And that number varies from year to year based on where you live and what have you. It's not the poverty level. Right. It isn't the poverty level. It's those that are struggling.
That are eligible for free or reduced lunch.
Yeah.
Okay. And how does that compare with the towns around us? The total number of high needs. How does that?
We're much higher.
Than virtually all the towns around us.
All the towns that surround us, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm going to have to go to school to learn.
And just, Mike, to sort of talk just for a minute about state aid, we've averaged over the last 10 years a net increase in state aid of about $130,000. So that's all we're realistically seeing increasing every year from state aid. It's important to remember that you as taxpayers pay state income tax, you pay state sales tax, and the state tries to share some of that with cities and towns. Interestingly enough, the last several years, the Commonwealth has actually reduced the income tax burden. What that's done is it's limited states' revenues and the state's ability to fund education and its commitment to education. Meanwhile, the property tax continues to go up in every community in the Commonwealth. So the state is reducing its income tax burden and consciously choosing to put that burden onto the property taxpayers, which is the least regressive tax that you have out there. So this year we did see a one-year positive adjustment in state revenues with state aid, but for it to really close that gap, the increase the state saw this year gave cities and towns, we would need to see that same increase in Norwood every year for the next 5 to 7 years, and the state just does not have that money without the state fundamentally raising taxes. And the economy's going about as good as it can reasonably go, so when you think of your tax mix, you're paying a lot in sales tax, you're paying a lot in income tax and property tax. In the state, in a lot of states do this, they're sort of shifting more onto the property tax burden. The reason we get the aid that we get, and this is every town in Massachusetts, has to do with a lawsuit in the early 1990s when the state went through a period of education reform where the state constitutionally is required to provide an education. We are legally obligated to provide education. The state is required to make sure there's enough funding for that, and then they don't do it. They've started to look at adjustments to the school aid formula this year because there have been threats that it's time to sue the schools, sue the state, again, to make sure that they're actually funding their portion of education. Remember, we're about a $192 million operation, $195 million in the town. The Commonwealth has a $44 billion budget, and a fairly small portion of that is allocated to assisting cities and towns with what the state mandates we're going to have to do for education. And I made a statement the other night, a lot of our aid that comes through as town aid is actually through lottery receipts, so I always encourage everyone to buy a scratch ticket.
Thank you, Tony. Just a couple of more points on this particular slide. If you notice, over the years, the state hasn't kept up with the rate of inflation in terms of the amount of state aid they provide us. So not only do they not keep up with state aid, but over the years, they have added a number of unfunded mandates, both to the town and the school side, probably more to the school side than the town side, which means even more money that has to come out of the pockets of Norwood taxpayers. And secondly, when you look at costs over the years to the town, many of those costs are really out of the control of Norwood. I want to look at two areas in particular. One is retirement. That's set, by the state, the amount of money which we have to pay towards retirement. That number has gone up over the last few years as more people retire, and there's more money that we simply have to put out. And the other one of the big budget busters we've had over the years has been health insurance. That's set by the state. This year it's going to be probably close to 5%. For a couple of years it's been, last 2 years it's been relatively flat, but I know from experience in the past that we've seen increases of 6 to 7% in the past, which we hope are all gone. But again, it's something which is totally out of our control, and we just have to deal with it when we see the final numbers.
We have a question way up in the back and then another one right here. So 1, 2, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Karen Meyer, I'm District 5. A couple of questions. I hear a lot of generalization of taxes will go up maybe $389. You've done a lot of number crunching. You must know what the tax rate will be per thousand. Can you state that, what it will be for residential right now? Because you know how many, houses there are, how many commercial things, it's 10.89 per thousand right now. Any idea what it's going to amount to?
Mr. Mizuko, do we have some data? Thank you.
So it's showing a projected increase of 86 cents on the residential side and $1.80 on the commercial side. But you have to keep in mind that it's always a projection until your fiscal year is closed and you actually set your tax rate in the fall. And the reason is the amount of new growth in the community, that's new additions to the tax base, will ultimately change what that rate is. But we always ask folks to focus on the average single-family tax bill or on your actual tax bill, because the rate is really just relative to the value in the community. We're going through a 10-year evaluation process, which every city and town has to do every 10 years or every 9 years. And oftentimes what happens in those is you will see the rate come down. It's because your values have gone up. So there's no net impact. I don't want to say there's no net impact, but you don't see a benefit of that rate going down. Most towns, every 10 years, you'll see that their tax rate appears to drop $1 or $2, but that's because the values have gone up. You're still paying the same dollar amount. Because remember, the tax levy is a fixed amount of the tax base. We have a tax levy of about $75 million. That number is what goes up by 2.5% a year. That number is what will go up by $5.9 billion if the override does pass. So that then gets spread out over the whole tax base. So the actual rate then becomes relative to what the whole value of the community is. One example I always give people when you're talking about the rate, if tomorrow every single property in Norwood doubled in value, what would happen is your tax rate would get cut in half, but you'd also pay the same tax bill. It never actually happens that every single property doubles at once or every single property gets cut in half at once. Your property changes compared to your neighbor's property. And one of the challenges we have, and it's a good challenge to have, is the percentage of our tax base that is residential versus commercial, because we tax the commercial properties higher than we tax the residential properties. But what you can see in a given year is that the value of residential property grows, and commercial property maybe stays the same, maybe it shrinks. So that does shift a little bit more of the burden onto the residential property owners, but that's also something you can't really control where residential values go versus commercial values. So sorry, that was a little bit of a long-winded answer, but.
No, I appreciate it. I didn't really know how it was all came together. One other question, you talked about a debt exclusion for the high school. I can see that Copley, the middle school, is gonna have another debt exclusion having to come up. And so that's gonna be another increase, but that's only temporary? Is that correct?
I'm going to ask my voting member chair of the school committee to answer that.
Okay.
The question has to do with is that exclusion over
So the question is, the debt exclusion override is a temporary or permanent, but I think, so it is temporary in that it's during the time that you're paying off that building. So as Mr. Slater said, for the high school, it was about 25 years.
Yeah, a little more.
Maybe a little more. I don't remember the details of that, but it would be a similar thing for the middle school. But I thought I'd jump up here to talk a little bit about what the plans are for a new middle school so that everybody is aware of that. We, as a town, committed to a long-term building study to look at all of the school buildings in town, their condition and their suitability for the educational needs and the number of students that they were serving. There was a group of a member of the FinCom, a member of the school committee, a member of the Board of Selectmen, contracts administrator, a representative group that worked with AI3 architects who actually designed this building and did a study of all of the buildings in town. And the outcome of the study was very clear that the Copley Middle School was in dire need of replacement. It does not meet our educational needs, it is grossly overcrowded, and it's just probably really wasn't a great design to begin with. So we have moved forward with the process of considering a new middle school. The first step was to submit a letter of intent to the state, to their School Building Authority, MSBA, Massachusetts School Building Authority. And we were very fortunate to have been chosen to participate in their eligibility period this year. That is the first stage in a long process to go forward towards state funding to help with building a new school. It's no guarantee that we will get state funding, but it's a necessary first step, and we were very excited to be invited to participate in that program. That eligibility period formally started on May 1st, so last week. This is a timeline that came out of that long-range building study. This is also available on the website. I know it's hard to read here, but it shows the fastest possible path to a new middle school. So I just want everybody to know what the fastest possible is and recognize that many school systems need to try more than once to get into the state program at each stage. So it's quite possible that this would be extended out beyond this. So you can see that in FY19, we were hoping we would be in that eligibility period. We are in that eligibility period. In the fall of this year, we will be asking town meeting to commit to $1.5 million, roughly, for a feasibility study. As I said, we'd already done one study that looked at, we really think that replacing the middle school is the way to go, but this would be a much more detailed study about what specifically are the needs, what specifically are the opportunities, where could we build this, should we look at grades 5 to 8 at the middle school, or just 6 to 8? All of those questions would be included, and we would need roughly $1.5 million to do that. If we did that, then the following year in 2020, we would conduct that feasibility study. At the beginning of 2021, we would be looking for town approval to go forward with an actual design. The earliest we could possibly begin construction would be the middle of 2022. Is that right? I'm having a hard time reading it from here. Okay, thank you. So it would be the middle of 2022 would be the earliest we could possibly begin construction. If we are moving forward with the state MSBA program, we could be eligible for roughly 50% funding from the state for a program, for a new middle school. So we expect that a new middle school would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $75 to $100 million, but we would be hoping that the state would cover half of that. And then, of course, the construction process would take 3 years, probably, and so the earliest we could possibly be in a new middle school would be fall of 2025, but that's only if everything works perfectly, and I wouldn't bet on that.
Right, nothing ever does.
Right.
So when is the high school going to be paid off, the debt exclusion?
So 2035 is the last scheduled debt payment for the high school. It was from 2010 to 2035. The last payment's actually much smaller than the existing payment. So 2034 is probably the last real payment, and then it gets cut way down to that last payment. It's sort of like that last mortgage payment that's less than the rest of them.
I was curious, Tony, you mentioned something about reserves. Do we not have any reserves left in the town budget? Has that been already depleted?
We do. They're dwindling, and they're not being generated at the rate that they used to. So there's two primary reserves that the town has. One is our Stabilization Fund. That's sort of like your rainy day fund. That's at about $4.8 million. So the comparison I always use to that, the town's a $195 million operation. So imagine you made $195,000 a year and you only had $4,800 in the bank. So in the event of an actual real emergency, we don't have a lot of reserves. The other one is our free cash. Now, free cash is what's known as sort of an operating surplus. It's what's left at the end of the year. This year, we only did $1.6 million in free cash. To put that in comparison, that means we generated a surplus of $1.6 million on a $195 million operation. The last community I worked in on a $9.5 million operation, we did 1.3. The town of Rentham did 3.3. Needham is at $8 or $9 million. So we are just not generating surplus revenue the way we should be. And surplus revenue comes from conservative budgeting, conservative revenue estimates. We're sort of maxing out every revenue estimate, just hoping that it all works. And as a town, we should actually be generating more than a town of a comparable size, because the way we're structured with our utility departments, in particular the light department and the cable company, we should be doing a whole lot more reserves than we actually are. But things like snow and ice deficit spending are what delete those reserves. So when you're going into a year saying, we know without a doubt, we're going to be pulling $500,000 out of reserves just to get through an ordinary year, that catches up with you after a while. Since the early part of the last decade, we've used about $15 million in reserves just to offset the budget. So if you think about it, that would have paid for the DPW building in cash. Normally you borrow for a project that size, but we're borrowing more and we're not generating the reserves at the level we should for a $195 million operation.
One of the other things I wanted to mention is that the three main boards, FinCom, Selectmen, and the school committee have gotten together and we're developing financial policies for the community, which we're very, very close to finalizing. It's just really more dotting the I's and crossing the T's. And one of the things in that that's in that policy is to try to promote reserves, build reserves for a number of reasons. I mean, we agree with you, reserves have been low, particularly because we've had to use so much free cash over the years, not only to balance the budget, but to pay for things that, quite frankly, should normally be in the operating budget, whether it's things such as the curriculum refresh for math that Dr. Thompson noted previously, or for rolling stock for the DPW. Those items should be in the operating budget. So one of the intents of the financial policies is to generate more reserves, not only for the reason I just mentioned, but it's important to the rating agencies who are pretty bloodless. I mean, they look at with their green eye shade, just dollars and cents as to where the community stands, and if we can improve our credit rating, because we have the second highest credit rating that you can get, AA+ from Standard & Poor's. If we can get to AAA, there will be an improvement, not a monumental improvement, but there will be an improvement in our bond rating, which will allow us to save money down the road, particularly when you potentially will have a major project such as the Copeland Middle School, come out. If you can save money and interest, then odds are better for everyone.
Just to add on to that, using the middle school as an example, the difference between our current credit rating and the top credit rating would save us several $1 million over the life of that project. Unfortunately, we actually technically maintain two credit ratings. There's the town's credit rating, and the light department has its own separate credit rating as an enterprise entity. They're both linked. One can't be better, one can't do well, and the other one not do well. The light department credit rating actually went down recently, and that's an indication that we're pulling so much money from the light department to help offset the town, they don't have it to invest in their own fund balances. The other thing with our credit rating, as Alan mentioned, it impacts our normal debt service number as well, so the better our credit rating, the fewer dollars we have to spend to borrow money for the projects we want to do. And can't underestimate the impacts of the credit rating. Our bond rating agencies, we get rated just the way any business does, or similar to how you have your own credit rating. They're not as happy with us as they used to have been. The last time we went out to borrow, we generally go to borrow every year. Our bond rating came with a whole lot of warnings that we're not doing A, B, and C. So they upheld our credit rating, but they sort of said we're projecting on a not great path, and I would assume that in the next year or two, if nothing changes, it's going to be tough to maintain the rating we're at. So we want to go to a better rating. Keeping us even where we're at is going to be challenging in the next couple of years. And just one other point, sorry. If we were sitting on $20 million in cash or $25 million in cash, I don't think we'd be asking for an override. You never want a deficit spend and just offset your budget, but if the cash dollars were there, that would be the solution to say, well, let's work on this, let's take the money out of the bank and do it. We're just at a point where we don't do it. To close the entire deficit this year would be 70% of our reserves.
We had a question with the lady in the purple shirt, and then the gentleman in the back, and then Mr. Esco.
Hi, Mary Coughlin, District 8. My question was answered, but just to verify something that I heard, the rate that we're going to be paying, or the amount, won't be established until after the vote? Because the budget won't be signed until after that vote, so this number isn't concrete?
No, so you're referring to what's known as the tax rate. The tax rate is actually never set until the fall because you have to have your final new growth numbers in. So the impact of $5.95 million on a $452,000 home is $390. If you do better than that with your new growth, the number actually may come down. That $390, I'm not saying it will, could actually be a lower impact on you, depending on how much the community grows. We project a certain tax-based growth. We are projecting $900,000. That's about our average. That could go up or down. You don't set a rate till the fall, but that's the definitive increase on the base. So this is all based on how our numbers are today. We don't know where the tax base is going to actually grow at until June 30th. So the number that we set the rate at in the fall is based on all the growth that's in the budget in the town as of June 30th. That's why you sometimes get an estimated tax bill the first quarter of the year, because we've got to settle all those numbers, know what the tax base actually looks like, and then it gets set in the fall. So, but the 5.95, that's sort of as it stands today.
The gentleman in the middle section at the back.
Hi, my name is Leo Mackler, District 4. My question is the other side of the equation is the cost structure, where we talk about the revenue, and we need more revenue. On the cost structure side, I'm perplexed by the fact that we didn't seem to address the Abrams report that was done by I think it was the Committee of 21. And the recommendations that came out of that to reduce spending. For people who don't know, the Abrams report is an organization that does studies for effective and efficient government. And there was a lot of things that came out of that in, I think, 2013 that don't seem to have been addressed. And certainly we're not part of what needs to be done if the override doesn't pass.
Are there any specific things in that report that you want to ask about, by the way? So I'm going to ask.
Oh, the recommendations that were made by, we paid for that, I think. Yep. Alan knows what we paid for it. I don't know what it was. How much was it?
30,000.
30 grand. So why didn't we address it?
I don't believe it's accurate that we didn't address them. I think there are quite a few in there that we did address.
Such as?
Excuse me?
Such as?
Oh, let me finish and I'll tell you. One of the things that was addressed addressed was there was talk about information technology. I believe that was included in there. The town is currently implementing the Munis software, which will be beneficial to both the town and the schools. It's a giant financial package that will allow better management and better reporting. For the schools, it's not only the financial reporting and tracking, purchasing, and all of that kind of stuff, but we are required to do annual reports to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education on a bunch of categories that relate to our students, and we need a system that will automatically do that reporting. So Munis is a huge step in the right direction for that. Another thing that they talked about in the Abrams report was to work towards some more joint departments, thank you, that were between the schools and the town. We have had a very active committee working towards a shared facilities department. It's not ready to go yet, but we have been working towards that work. Since the Abrams report came out, another thing that was mentioned in the Abrams report was concerns that our salaries go up higher, our teacher salaries go up higher more quickly than surrounding communities. I personally dug into that, into the most recent state information on that, and I can tell you that I looked for, are there places where we are increasing faster than neighboring communities? And I think Sue Bartlett's going to help pull up the data on this. Like any employer, we have to consider the market when we're setting salaries. We need to be able to have salaries that are competitive so that we can hire and retain qualified faculty and staff. So we looked at how our salaries compare to neighboring communities. The state this past year actually collected data from all communities in the state, all school districts in the state, and they looked at 9 different data points within each teacher contract. They looked at how much a teacher with a bachelor's degree makes if they are at that first year, if they're at year 5, and if they're at the top step in that contract. Then they did the same thing for salaries with master's degrees, and then they did the same thing for salaries with the highest level in any contract. So in our contract, we pay the most for teachers with PhDs. And this is looking, if we can flip ahead to couple more slides. So this is looking at the typical path. So if a teacher comes in, is hired with a bachelor's degree, and they're at step 1, they're a first-year teacher. And then by year 5, they've attained a master's degree. In Massachusetts, in order to keep state accreditation or certification to teach, you need to attain a master's degree. And then by the end of their career, they're somewhere between a master's degree and a PhD. We do have a couple of options in between there, but the state didn't collect data on all of that, so you can see 2 different points there. So in this case, Norwood is the red line, and we looked at Boston and Newton. Those are the yellow lines way up top. I know those are high-paying districts, and they aren't in some ways direct competitors for us, but I do know people who live in Norwood who work in both of those districts, so I think it's relevant to point out. But what we really wanted to compare to are the communities in blue and green. The blue communities were the communities that were used in the Abrams report: Burlington, Stoughton, Canton, Dedham, Walpole, and Milford. The green lines are communities that are other neighboring communities: Foxborough, Medfield, Braintree, Sharon, Needham, Milton, Westwood. Just to give you an idea, because certainly people who live in our community may like to work in Norwood, but they have options. They are willing to drive 20 minutes to a school to make more money. So we looked at how our salary structure compares to our competitors, and we find that we're not going faster. We're not seeing that increase that we say, well, we go up faster each year than those surrounding communities are. If you look at that slope of the line, I'm an engineer, so I'm always looking at the data. Our slope isn't higher than anybody else's, and in fact, we're in that pack, we're on the low side. Alan, did you want to talk about anything else about the
Follow-up, sir? Yes. Well, I understand, I'm glad you went to this slide because I have a question here too, but on the other one, the IT, Abrams really didn't think there was much for us to accomplish there. But certainly on the facility side, which you brought up, that was almost 5 years ago. Why? I mean, in 5 years, we all know that you can't tell what's going to happen. What takes so long to make a decision about moving the facilities and having one facilities department for the town? I don't understand why it takes 5 years and we still haven't done it. Because that's money we could have saved over 5 years.
One thing is, actually, as we've done the facilities study, and I'm on that shared facilities committee, we don't believe that it's actually going to save us money. We think that it will give us more efficiencies, and in the long run, we will do a better job of maintaining particularly the general government buildings. One of the things that came out of the school building study was that the school buildings are actually very well maintained. But we think that we could do a better job and do more proactive planning if we had a shared facilities department. But in the short run, it's not going to reduce our costs. And Alan, I think you also want to speak to this.
I think as Maya put it, over the short term, it probably won't save a significant amount of money. We do feel that it will save money over the long term, no question, particularly given the condition of a number of the buildings that we've had and the money which we have to spend. I don't disagree with you. I mean, the Abrams report was, what, about 2013, 2014, as I recall. I think it should have been done before then. It wasn't. I'm not sure there was a will on either side as much as there is today to do that. But that's in the past. I mean, we definitely want to get that done. I'm hopeful that it'll get done in the fall. There's a mechanism set up to do that. I think it's going to be in the long term in the best interests of everyone involved, both on the school side as well as the general government side, to have that. And it's the way other communities have gone, and I strongly support that. That's what you do also.
So help me understand why none of the, because I'm trying to decide whether to vote for the override or not, why none of the recommendations for what will happen if the override doesn't go through includes those things that were savings.
The facility study, I'm not sure if I understand the question completely, but the facility study should be independent of whether we have an override or not. The mechanism is there to establish a facilities department, which we hope can be done in the fall. Which again is independent of whether an override passes or not.
Well, help me understand that. I mean, the Abrams thing said that the facilities department would save $750,000. But that's not up here as things that we would do if the override didn't go through.
Yeah, I mean, well, I wasn't on the facility study that Maya noted, but I do know, knowing the numbers in the budget and what's involved in setting up a facilities study, a facilities department, and not that there's absolutely no way, and I emphasize no way, that that's going to save anything close to $750,000. In fact, in the first several years, because of the necessity to add personnel to a facilities department, it's good because, again, it's a town-wide department. It's simply not related, as we have now, simply to the school system, that in the short run, it may be a little bit additional money to the budget over the long term, because of maintenance costs and savings and efficiencies and economies of scale. You will be saving some money, but I can tell you it is Again, I don't know why the Abrams report used $750,000. That number is just at least an order of magnitude greater than it should be.
Okay, thank you. One last question, I don't want to hog this thing. Can someone explain why it makes sense for us to be on the entry level and all the way up to step 8 across all the lanes? We're below everybody, other towns, and then all of a sudden some magic thing happens at step 8 and we start an incredible slope up.
I don't see an incredible slope. I see that
Well, you see the-
at first.
you see the red-
Okay, at the first thing we have, at first step we have 2 communities below us. At the second, at that 5-year step, we have 1 or 2 communities below us. It's a little hard to see.
Yep.
Then when we get out there, when you compare our people with a master's degree, there's maybe 3 communities below us. And then our people with a PhD, you can't tell whether it's other communities with a PhD or I think it's actually people with master's degrees who are below us there. Because each of those things divides off. But maybe we should go back to one of the other slides so we can look at just the PhD slide.
Well, there's only 2 PhDs, right?
Right. Okay, so if you go back to, this is the master's degrees. All right, so, all right, skip ahead 1 to the master's degree. So this shows us, we start out, we are paying people with masters in the first year. We have 2 districts below us. In 5 years, we have 1 district below us. In the last one, we have 3 districts below us. But I think we're all kind of trending in the same direction. All those green lines seem to be going up at the same rate.
No, but explain to me why it makes sense for us to be in, I don't know how many towns are up there, but we're in the bottom quadrant of
We're
all
what?
the towns. We're in the bottom quadrant of all the towns up there
Yes,
that are
across the
hiring
board.
new people, getting the best and the brightest to come to Norwood. Why?
I'm not sure if I exactly understand the question. You're right, we don't actually pay that well. We're lucky we have a good climate, which does somewhat attract people, but you gotta remember, especially when you're a young kid and you're starting out, $1,000 or $2,000 in your salary, that makes a big difference. At the end of the spectrum, a teacher with 20 years is not necessarily gonna jump to another district for a couple more $1,000, but it makes it challenging, and that's one of the issues we face because we have a very defined industry. Teachers have a direct comparison. Police officers have a direct comparison. Firefighters have a direct comparison. And one of the reasons our costs tend to grow greater than inflation is we do have to keep up with the direct industry comparison. It's not like if you're an accountant and maybe the accountants over here making this kind of money or they're making it, and because all of our salary data is public, if I'm a kid and I want to be a firefighter, I can tell exactly what Norwood and every other one of the towns in the Commonwealth are going to pay. So we're a good community. We have a lot of people who grow up in Norwood and they want to stay here and they want to work here. The traffic in Boston is actually a benefit to us because some people at some point don't want to make that commute. But you're absolutely right. We're running the risk of not being competitive. Where you're a kid coming out of school, and do I want to work at Norwood for 48 grand a year, or oh look, it's 54 grand a year in Dedham or King? That's a big deal for a young kid coming right out of school. So it's a challenge that we face, and we're going to have to continue to address it.
Why? Why do we elect
Sir, can I ask you
top
to do me a
decision?
favor? Can I ask you to do me a favor? Can I give the microphone to Mrs. Esco? She's waiting. I promised her she was next one. And maybe, we'll be here afterwards if you have more questions, I promise. Mrs. Esco.
Thank you, Tony Esco,
Go ahead.
District 5. It wasn't my intention to talk about the Abrams report, but just for 1 minute, because I was on that committee. I was on that committee, and one of the things that came out, and I've been off the school committee just a few years when I entered that committee. And one of the things that came out of that report was a lot of data. And I forget the acronym, the data report, the data statistics. And one of the things that came out of it that people weren't happy about was, in order to compare Norwood's data to comparable towns, we could no longer be compared to our contiguous neighbors, and that was a shock. They had to compare us to Avon and Falmouth. And people said, what the heck are you talking about them for? We're not. Quite frankly, this override was needed 6, 7, 8 years ago. I don't know how or why FinCom took their earplugs out, but I'm glad, because the school department has been screaming for years. The other thing that came out of statistics, I don't know if they're as valid now as they were 6-7 years ago. We, on a high school level at least, we have a higher transiency rate. We had a higher dropout rate. We had a higher out-of-school suspension rate, all due to the fact that the children that we deal with perhaps don't stay in the community as often, or they move more. You could connect it a little bit to the, economically challenged students. We're a very compassionate school district. I always say that public schools are more Christian than the parochial schools, because if you don't behave, you get kicked out. And where do they go? To the public school. The public schools, those Statue of Liberty, give me a hungry, you're tired, you're poor, the ones that don't behave anybody. We take them all, and we do a darn good job with the minuscule money that we have. So it's a shame that we didn't do this years ago. But there's a percentage of Norwood voters, and I hear it, who are very disappointed that after the big debt exclusion for the high school, that the academic standing of Norwood High has gone down, down, down. People are upset about that. And so I'm glad this money is coming. The responsibility is going to be on the school department. I hope you will be excited and infused with energy, because I do believe this override will pass. But I have to agree too that out of that April study, they did talk about a unified facilities director. But the other thing is, we had that study 6-7 years ago with all the statistics, and still the town didn't listen and didn't provide the schools with the staff they needed, especially English language learners, because now the students, never mind coming in speaking a little English, they come in speaking no English. That's a big difference. Anyway, my question was though, if with the override passing, because I assume it will I know there's a lot of fees that have become quite a burden to families who will not be sharing the burden of an override too. Will the fees be the same for the buses and activities and athletics and all that? So that's one thing. I want to know whether or not those could be abated even just a little, if there's any wiggle room for that. My second question was, I see that in year 2 to 5, we don't want to hire too many staff with benefits, but if this override passes, it looks like the school department will be looking for several extra staff people. So I assume you'll be looking for those in July, in the summer. I know it's not the most optimum time. Hopefully you'll find the staff you need. So that was our question. But my question was more about the fees for the parents who pay for them.
Fee question.
Yes.
Thank you, Tom. So Ms. Esco is right that we do have fees that we currently charge our students. Unfortunately, we are not able to reduce those fees, but I do want everyone to understand what those fees are. Our current fees and the fees that will continue to be if the override passes. A bus fee for students who are not legally entitled to a bus based on state law, that's $300 per student per year. For athletics, it is $200 per student per season, with a family cap of $800 per family. So that is a significant impact on families. Obviously, we would love to be able to reduce those amounts, but we have a lot of needs, and we also felt some pressure not to make the override number even higher. So we think that we've really reached kind of the top of where we should have our fees. In fact, a few years ago, the school committee increased the bus fee from $250 a year to $300 a year. We hoped that we would see, a 20% increase in our bus fee revenues. It didn't. It went up, but it didn't go up 20%, because what happened is parents started to say, if it's going to be $300 a year, maybe I'll find another way for my kid to get to school. So, but I do want to talk about the fees if the override fails. If the override fails, there is no money in the budget to support extracurricular activities such as athletics, arts, and activities. That means they would all need to be self-funding. And we do have the information up on our website showing how much it would cost. we would be looking for a minimum number of students to participate in each program. And I believe we need 30 students to agree to, not only agree to participate in football, I'm just talking about the football program because that's one of the ones in the fall. Not only would they need to agree to participate, they would need to provide us a check by the middle of June for roughly $1,100. If we get 30 checks of $1,100 each, then we could afford to run the program. But even then, we're not guaranteed that we will run the program because we are still subject to Title IX, meaning that the federal government says that we have to have gender equity between opportunities for boys and girls athletics and everything else, but in this case we're talking about athletics. Okay, here the number is, yes, we need 30 students to pay $1,122.95 each. The least expensive sport up here would be cross country, but we would need 15 students to each pay $675 in order to afford to run the cross country program. So the idea is we would collect these checks and then we'll look at how many people want to run various programs, and we need to make sure that we have an even distribution between opportunities and funding for girls and boys, and then we'll decide which programs we can actually run, and if we have a Title IX problem and there's a mismatch between the boys and the girls side, we might need to cancel a program and refund some of that money. It wouldn't be a pretty process at all. The school committee was very conflicted about even offering this as an option because it obviously is terrible for families. It really will limit which students can participate. With our current fees, the $200 per season per athlete, we have an option for students who qualify for free and reduced lunch to have free or reduced fees. With the pay-to-play model, we can't afford to even offer that unless we can maybe find somebody who can later make some donations for some scholarships or something like that. But we're really up against the gun. The athletic competitions for next year have already been scheduled. The league is counting on us. They are aware that we are facing this override vote and we may withdraw funding from all of our athletics, but they can't wait that long. We need to let them know in early summer if we're going to pull out of if we're going to withdraw teams so that they can make adjustments accordingly. So there's going to be a really quick turnaround on trying to figure out which teams we can run.
Yeah, I want to bring up the high school achievement piece that you brought up. So, I mean, if you look back at the demographics and how they've changed, so here's what's happened. We've brought, welcomed in higher numbers of English language learning students, higher economically disadvantaged, our sped numbers have gone up. Meanwhile, we have not invested in the classroom. We've cut 5 or 6 teachers at the high school. We don't have those intervention pieces going on at the high school. The state has dropped the grants for the intervention because the towns are supposed to take them over. So we put more demands and not funded accordingly. No new curriculum, no software tools to do the intervention, to measure where kids are. So, I mean, it comes back to investing, the numbers piece. This year, the total number is 12.7 in this first year, and then we will be at that possible 5. But we need to do a better job in the classroom. So some of the other topic out there is that 55 FTEs. That's a false number. Okay, talk about myths, because what that was done was in 2012, the American Recovery Act came in, and a lot of people were funded through grants. Okay. For some reason in Norwood, we're only reporting FTEs that are funded in the town budget, and that was a huge swing of about 12 or 15 people that were funded out of grants. That was the lowest possible number you could start with. If you go back to 2010, okay, we actually added 36.04 FTEs net, and 27 of those are direct student services for those with special needs. Paraprofessionals, teachers, people that do evaluation, those sorts of people, okay? So that's where the money has gone, to the mandates. And if you're not doing the regular stuff and intervening, you're having more kids move into those categories where you need to be mandating FTEs. Okay, we need to have tools for our teachers to do a better job in the classroom so we have less kids falling into special ed and other categories.
Bertie, you have the microphone there, and a young lady who wants to ask a question.
Hi, my name is Ann. I'm from District 3. I remember when the Copa was built, it was called the South Junior High, and they also built a junior high on Prospect Street called the North Junior High. So I was wondering why you can't use the North Junior High as a school building.
We actually are. It's housing our preschool. The problem with that building is it's actually older than the Coakley. It does not have an elevator in it. And at this point in time, we would have to invest a lot of money into that because we don't have a kitchen that actually works there anymore either. So it has been closed down. So it doesn't run, you know, we can't really run school on the second floor. We are running school on the first floor. However, I did look at that as an option with combining a couple elementary schools at the Savage, because I'm there in this little overhead, much of it, more kids running around. But I was told it's not a possibility because of the lack of an elevator, the lack of a cafeteria and kitchen.
Karen, you had your hand up, right?
Yeah, just curious. Just curious, if the override does not pass, when can the town school present another override? Can you do it every year?
Technically, you could come back in the fall. I mean, you can, in theory, have as many override votes as your board of selectmen are willing to put on a warrant. So what happens is sometimes if it fails, sometimes they wait till the following year, sometimes they bring it back in the fall. It all depends. I do know a town out in Western Mass that assumed it was a very small override, but assumed it would pass without a problem. It actually failed, which kind of surprised them. And they just called another election 45 days later and voted again and passed. So it's really up to, you can call as many elections as you want.
I'm going to jump in on that one too. It is true that we could have another override in the fall, but I want everyone to know that that doesn't negate the impacts that we would have if this override were to fail. As I said, we have to decide at the beginning of the summer whether the athletic programs are running. If this override fails, on June 4, we're going to start the process of closing down the Willet. The teachers are going to be packing, we're going to be moving things. Even if we were to get more money in the fall, we wouldn't reopen the Willett School in the middle of the year. That would just be chaos for everyone. So, you know, that's all.
And it's one thing that people don't realize with schools, we have a hard close and a hard open. And making corrections mid-year, I mean, if you think back a year and a half ago to when we moved the preschool out of the Willett because of overcrowding, okay? That was a laborious process to do that. That was only 7, 8 classrooms, okay? And we had to basically shut the school down for a week and a half, and we're lucky that people came in to help with that. Otherwise, it wouldn't happen. There's no way we could recover next year to bring that back.
Do we have any other, we do have it, yes, right here.
Hi there, Mandy Grove, District 7, also a town meeting member. It's worth mentioning that don't forget that elections cost money. So if you want to do them all the time, you got to pay for them. But my question is, when I'm talking to constituents in my district about, hey, there's an override, oh, why did it happen? Oh, here's all the situations. A question that comes up that I would love for someone to be able to articulate today is, well, why don't we just sue the state? And you talk to the risks and challenges of trying to force the state to fund things through suit.
There actually are 2 communities, one of which being Brockton, that is contemplating that. It's finding the right community to bring it forth. Brockton is actually in a very terrible situation. But there are 2 communities that have looked at that, and there has been discussion around that, which is probably kind of why we saw some movement this year. I don't want to say threat, but you know, if things don't get better, then it probably be an option. Wouldn't be us though. Well, Tony wants it.
We all set with the questions then? Mike Bergeron, you want to continue the one? Go ahead.
If there's one thing before I die, I want to learn how to use one of these microphones.
We'll wait while you do it.
Let me work on this one. Is it on now?
Oh, okay. All right. What I wanted to, somebody mentioned the 55 new positions in the school department. Can you give me a number that are directly related to the high needs, the special needs, you know, and
I didn't just bring the briefcase, so I looked important.
Yeah.
I had them right here. I don't know if that graph, I don't know if I handed this graph to Sue. But, you know, the net increase from 2010 to this past year was 36.04, okay? The net change for special education was 34.17. Now keep in mind, your economic disadvantage, your ELLs have gone up, and 34 out of 36 were for special education. And they include 22.8 paras, 1 ELL para, 3.25 English language learner teachers, and 7.12 special education teachers. Okay, so the difference between our net increase, okay, total, and those for special ed and ELL, all right, what wasn't was 1.87 in 9 years. All right, and I can tell you what those differences were. A tech director, which is needed, and the other is your math coordinator. Those teachers have come and gone, but that's your net change. That's not special ed or ELL, 1.87.
those are compelling numbers.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, we want to thank everybody for coming down today. We appreciate your taking time out of your lives to hear the presentations and look at the data and to ask questions about them. I mean that. This has been a most enriching, I think, civic exercise overall, however it comes out. But is there anything else? All right. If there are no more questions, we'll be hanging around a little bit for a few minutes anyway, but we want to thank.
I have a question. I know you don't want to hear it, but the spend per student, do we have those numbers? Spend per student?
Your pupil.
Per pupil.
About $16,000.
16 to 17,000.
And that's up, what, from 3 years ago?
So we can have the superintendent get you the information, but I always encourage people that the per pupil expenditure is not a very good example to look at when you're trying to figure out what you're spending on your school department. If you take a classroom of 20 students, if you add 1 student or delete 1 student, the number doesn't change. The cost is the same. There are districts out in Western Mass, out in the rural parts of the state, that are some of them are spending $20,000 or $22,000 per student, and the education that they're offering is awful. I actually believe I had a higher per pupil expenditure in the town of Adams than we do here, and we offered a terrible, terrible education compared to what's offered here, because your student number tends to just fluctuate. So again, that number goes up or down. That per pupil is really just taking total expenses and divided by the student. But 10 more students don't necessarily increase that, and 10 more students going down don't necessarily increase that. But Dave can get you the specific numbers.
They're actually, all the per pupil, and it's last year, the 19 numbers won't be posted until next fall. But the problem with per pupil, every town reports their spending a little differently. So it's not a consistent number. Some towns will attribute the town treasurer at 20%, some at 40%, and some of that office is attributed to the schools, depending. So it's not the same, it's not on the same, the levels are not all the same. So you kind of have to take that, with a grain of salt. You're looking at increases or decreases, you can see that. But if you go to the Department of, DOE.ma, it used to be the Department of Ed, they never changed their web address. So you just go to school profiles and financials, and you can see all that information.
No, I was comparing, I think it was if I have the numbers right. I think it was in 2014, it was about $12,000 somewhat dollars a student. The 2017, I think, was up to 17 something, which was like a 36% increase over, that period of time, which was 3 or 4 years. I'm wondering what the magic number is, not compared to other towns, for Norway. What's the number that's going to get us to where we are, or to the better school systems in the state? I mean, people like to call us the jewel of the Commonwealth, but that's not the case when it comes to how the schools are.
Yeah, well, if I had that answer, I'll be the Commissioner of Education, not the Superintendent here in Norwood. But and again, I don't think there is a magic number. I think it's a combination of appropriate spending, quality people, giving the people in your schools the tools to do the job to get it done. We just haven't been able to do that here in the past. The nice thing about being in Norwood, even early on a Saturday morning for a non-morning person, is that the quality of people in this town, the quality of people in our schools are just amazing. And they are working tirelessly to keep us where we are. If we give them the tools, I have all the confidence in the world that we're going to start seeing that trend go up.
All right, thank you everyone. As you know, town meeting is this coming week, and we're probably going to do a few later, prior to the June 3rd vote, a few Q&A sessions that'll be a little bit lower key. We'll get dates out for those when we have them. And several of us will stick around here if anyone has any additional questions. So thank you everyone. Have a great day.